with all due respect.
Hey, we're Josh Ortegon and Gray Gaines, and this is With All Due Respect, the show where we keep it real about health, fitness, and performance. From weight loss to sports development, we're covering the conversations that matter.
Follow us on Instagram at Phenom Fitness, PHNM Fitness, and visit www.phenomfit.com to check out our training programs, coaching, and gear built for real results. Let's get into it.
All right, guys, we hope you like this one. I think, Gray, this one might have been my most exciting one we've done in a little
I
while.
knew you were gonna love it. I knew it
Uh,
because there's such an emotional tie to sports
I
and just
know.
like,
Yes.
I mean, we always try to have like an in-depth conversation around like health, fitness, sports. Like we try to cover all of it, but when you can like touch on the heartstrings of sports, I know you're into it.
Yeah. Sports geography, sports and politics and the connection to sports and our human emotion and sociology. This is Eddie, what was it? Bairam?
Bairam,
Bairam,
Bairam.
Eddie Bairam, that you
Mhm.
met in your many wonderful travels of the world
In
on
Wyoming.
Wyoming, and he teaches sports geography in the
Mhm.
in college. And I hope you guys enjoy this. This was definitely entertaining, and we hope you guys enjoyed it. Bye.
But
All right, we are back. If you're watching With All Due Respect, this is I think it's only the third episode with Gray back in action after getting married.
hmm
Yep, so we're back,
Party.
and today we have Eddie Bairam. I said that correct? Okay, that
Sounds good to me.
that word, yeah, man, just that word's correct. And Gray, this is your friend, and Gray, when you first told me, hey, I got a friend named Eddie, and he's a professor. Let me send you some of the stuff that he talks about. And I was sitting in my car, and I was like, I'm all in on this. Like,
Yeah,
this is right down. The fact that this is even studied in college, I think, is pretty cool, right? Uh,
totally.
so great. Just talk about how you know Eddie, and then Eddie, introduce yourself, and we'll start rocking and rolling.
Yeah, it's actually a funny story because for those of you who don't know who are listening, I did a cross country road trip with my best friends out to my wedding. So we drove from South Carolina out to Montana. We stopped in Jackson Hole for 2 nights, and we actually met Eddie and all these guys at one of like the famous bars called $1 Million Cowboy Bar. And I think we had first started talking about soccer, and I like heard your accent. I'm like, okay, he's got to be into soccer. I love to talk about soccer. And it kind of just dove in from there. And he told me what you did. And I was like, okay, perfect conversation to come on to the podcast and talk about all the things that you do with sports. And especially because Josh is very interested in sports too.
Yeah, the whole aspect of not just the person that watches, but the sports history and history of sports. So, Eddie, you're a professor. Can you give us a background of your life, who you are, what you've done, how you got into teaching, what you teach? Because it's highly fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed the show. Listened to a few of your podcasts. I think what you're doing is fantastic. And yeah, it's great to be here. So I've had a career as both a coach and as an educator. I coached soccer for about 15 to 20 years, from recreation to club to high school level. I transitioned out of that career into academia, where I went to grad school and started studying geography. And I managed to somehow carve out a career teaching geography with a lot of sport flavor to it. Since the time I've been sort of studying geography now, it's been about 10 or 11 years now. And I've been teaching in at the university level now for about 8 or 9 years. And in that time, I've sort of started to see how sports and geography kind of intersect with one another, and seeing how like you can look at sports from a spatial perspective, which is what we do in geography. We look at things spatially. We try to understand, essentially geography is the study of the world, but we also look at human and environment interactions. So essentially, what we're looking at here with the sport is how does sport essentially impact people and place? And when with that sort of becoming your sort of mantra, if you will, and the way you look at sports. There's so many different directions you can go into that. And having been a coach, I've been in there working, especially at the youth level. I've kind of got to see a lot of dynamics. I've had the privilege to visit 42 of your United States, which is a lot more than most Americans have been told.
Hmm.
And through that process, I've worked in quite a few of those states as well, and I've seen sort of like the cultural dynamics. And essentially, I've used a lot of that experience with what I've been doing. I managed to write a piece, an article, and I turned my dissertation at grad school into an article looking at women's soccer players and looking at their origins and then spatial diffusion, and then trying to understand that through socio-cultural dynamics. So I kind of shared that paper with you guys, and so what we started seeing was that there was like a consistent pattern of where female soccer players were originating from in the US, and sort of where that pattern sort of continued. Now it's changed a lot significantly since I wrote that
When
paper,
did you
but
write that paper?
I wrote that about 8 years ago now.
Okay.
It got published 7 years ago, but I wrote it 8 years ago. And so a lot of things have changed. I've started seeing now a lot more play in the areas that we didn't see players now. So now players are pretty much coming from all over the country now, being developed from all over the country, which is really great in terms of a human development aspect. Um, but yeah, so I look at different aspects. I guess if you define what I do, I guess I'm a regional cultural geographer. I've got my expertise. I sort of specialize in North America, Europe, the Middle East, or Southwest Asia, should we call it? This is the real name for it, is Southwest Asia and North Africa. I sort of look at um, socio-political dynamics, look at some of the history involved in those areas, understanding concepts like migration, language, religion, identity formation. Those are the things I kind of teach on a weekly. I teach world regional geography and the regions of those ones we just talked about. But I also look at geopolitics, nationalism, globalism, regional conflicts, and kind of how they shape a lot of those societies. But with the sports coming in now, there's so many different directions you can go into that. So, for example, in more recent times, the region of the Middle East or Southwest Asia has become a big player in sports. And they've been using a lot of the states in those regions have been using sports in what we call soft power. Soft power meaning for sports diplomacy, and then also using sports as a cultural means to sort of find ways to connect that region and the people of those regions into more of like the global economy and global cultural practices such as the World Cup, and the Olympics. And then lately we've been seeing motor racing like Formula One. That's been a big one as well. So, you've seen that those sort of things take shape, which is really good to see that. And in Europe itself, Europe has been sort of a stronghold for soccer. And you've seen that transcend across the Atlantic, especially not to South America. I think that's really got a strong soccer presence, but into North America specifically, especially in the last 2 or 3 decades, especially at that youth level, but also into the mainstream now. It's become pretty strong player now, with the classic big three and a half we call in sports, your football or American football, should we say, basketball and baseball, and then ice hockey, of course. So we're seeing soccer now becoming a slow but steady player in that group. And if you see in my paper, I think women's soccer had a large role to play in that,
Yeah.
especially with the US women winning so many World Cups,
Mhm.
which has been a great play with nationalism. I think a lot of people find a lot of cultural and identity formation through that affinity when they see the national team doing so well. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, your paper, when Grace sent me over your paper really talked about who access and who were
Hmm.
the girls playing and who were the girls moving on to the next level and the access they had. And that's always been a big topic to me is I feel like we're losing access. Kids are losing access to sports, uh, partially because we professionalize sports. It's becoming expensive. Anytime you make something expensive, you're going to eliminate a group of people that can't afford to play, right? All the talent in the world, but just socioeconomically can't afford to play, right? So I do believe that we've turned this thing into, and you see it a lot in club sports. It's no longer the players that are good enough to rise up. It's the girls who are, or the athletes that are good enough to pay for it, or have enough money to pay for it, right? And we've had that discussion off camera before, where we're kind of, I told you my joke always is it's just a kind of a knife jab joke. Is nothing's ruined youth sports like capitalism,
Mhm.
and I say it tongue in cheek, right? Um, but that was what really got my interest in your paper. Was as soon as I read the first paragraph, I'm like, I'm all in. But then when we had our conversation, my mind was just, my mind all of a sudden went to 1,000 of these other places. And when you sent over your notes, you talked about the intersection between sports and geography. And you start having, and you tell me if I'm off base, right? When you say sports and geography, the first thing that came to my mind is, well, the best hockey players come from cold areas, or the best hockey players come from Alaska. And would Wayne Gretzky be Wayne Gretzky if he was born in Orlando? You know, is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about completely something different?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's part of it. That could be part of it. So there's a part of the course that, so at the university now we're starting this new course called the Wide World of Sports, and it starts next week. Actually, it's the first time we're going to be doing this. And one of the components of it is regionalism in sports, trying to understand how geography and place kind of shape sports preferences. So
Oh,
if you look at certain places like, ice hockey, for example. So if you're coming from like more higher latitude regions where it's cooler, like Canada or, northern US and those sort of regions, those Great Lake areas, you're going to see a lot of hockey players come out of that region because that environment promotes that from happening. But through global processes, what we're seeing now is that you can go to Las Vegas and there's ice hockey rinks there, and there's like an ice hockey team there that's pretty good from what I hear, right?
Yeah.
So it's not hard to imagine that at some point, maybe that region could produce a decent ice hockey player. It's the same living in Southern California, or you guys are in South Carolina. You're on the coast, so you're going to have access to more beach sports, like beach volleyball, and surfing. So those environments will shape and allow access for people to participate. Same being in the mountains. If in the mountains, you're probably going to have access to skiing and snowboarding. But also again, we've looked at technology changing. So for the longest time, soccer, games that were played on fields were played on grass fields. But with this new turf that they're designing now, you can, again, go to Vegas and you're in the desert and there's like all these turf complexes that you can play. There's like 10, 15 soccer fields or out in the desert, but it's all turf. So it's quite interesting to see how technology, globalization has allowed environments to be transformed that can allow athletes to emerge from those areas. So I think that's quite an interesting thing that we look at with geography. But historically, you can look at regionalism, why certain places are playing certain sports. A good one we talk about in the course is people from India like to play cricket, or people from South Asia like to play cricket. Now, that's a colonial legacy. That's not really shaped from the actual physical
oh,
geography. That's the history and colonial
oh.
part of it. And even the name soccer itself, people say, like, where does that name come from? And why is it us Americans are the only ones that say it? It's actually the name soccer actually started by British people. And then it kind of just stuck from there. And then obviously as American football developed, there was a split at some point. But it's quite interesting to see the name of that, how that formed itself. So you start seeing a lot of history play itself out with sports and how certain places start playing certain games like cricket, like I say, and rugby, you look at some of those former colonial outposts from the British Empire. That's a lot of the aristocracy, um, or the upper classes would play that, whereas soccer became much more of a working class sport.
Okay.
But even though it was introduced by the upper classes, eventually it was overwhelmed by by the working classes, and in fact a lot of those sports, like the Olympics, were kept as amateur to keep the working classes out, because when you played amateur, you didn't need coaching. You had coaching, but you had access to all your facilities. You didn't need to get paid because you were rich enough to have access to everything.
Wow.
Whereas the working classes needed to be paid to do that. So the upper classes wanted to kind of marginalize and keep them out. So sports actually show us a good reflection of what's going on in society with access from different classes too. So it's a good way to tell stories about who we really are.
Yeah, I think about like lacrosse
Mhm.
Yep.
that had a Native American, I believe we
Yeah.
came over and they had they saw the Native Americans playing it
Mhm.
and they started adopting it as a sport that they played. And you just jog my memory of so many different sports that have come from that.
Something. Yeah.
Very interesting about the amateur sports was brought to keep out the upper or the lower class from
Yeah,
being
that's what
involved.
amateurism was. Yeah, amateurism for the longest time. I mean, have a look. The Olympic athletes only started getting paid not so long ago. It was
Yeah.
for, it wasn't not so long ago they started getting paid, but for the longest time they weren't allowed to be paid. And even the first World Cup was in the Olympics, and they kept all the pros out. So that's how the FIFA came about, to become an organization to break away from the Olympics.
Well,
But
It's so
when
crazy.
basketball until the 90s, the United States sent their amateurs.
Mhm.
yep.
And then they get sick of losing, so they sent their pros, and then it was over. Right?
92, right? The
Yeah,
dream team,
Dream
right? Wasn't
Team,
it?
92. Yeah. And you in our conversation before this, we had a whole conversation that probably could have been filmed as part of the podcast.
I know. I was thinking that too.
But you touched on a topic that was very interesting to me, and that's sports and nationalism and like national identity, and
Mhm.
how we all have been part of something where it became bigger than just people on the field playing a game. And I feel like soccer, that history goes back far beyond our history of American sports. And the first thing I can ever think of, and we talked about it, was the Miracle on Ice in 1980, that was really just the Olympic hockey tournament, but it turned into the dirty Soviets versus the red, white, and blue Americans. And, these Soviets were these rigid, hardcore, Soviet monsters, and the Americans were these people fighting for freedom on ice, you know? And when you brought that up, I guess I've never stopped and paused and looked at it and went like, wow, they turned that into something. I wonder if the players knew what it was, or the
Right,
players were just
right.
like, hey, we're just out trying to win a gold medal.
Yep.
And all of a sudden they're turning on the TV and it's the socialists versus the Americans, and it's a war on ice,
It's
right?
us and them, right? It's us and
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you brought that up to me, all of these other things started coming on, all the way down to it brought a memory to me. I was running a sports camp for a bunch of kids, and I grew up in Michigan as a Michigan football fan. And we tell all kids to all get in a line. And this little kid comes running up to the front, pushing everybody out of the way, and he's got an Ohio State shirt on. And as a Michigan fan, it's not going to fly for me. I made him turn his shirt inside out and go to the back of the line because he's and the conversation we had made me remember things like that. And I was like, well, truly, the Miracle on Ice is not the first time that's happened, that we've done that, or we've attached some form of national identity to a sports team. And then you started bringing up where you grew up with soccer, and like, there were probably sports pubs that you couldn't go into if you supported Manchester United. You know what I'm saying? Things like that. And I'm just like, and and it made my brain go a million miles an hour. Now it's something you're studying, right?
And teaching,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah,
And teaching
absolutely
it to
teaching it.
people
Yeah.
as part of a, I mean, is that part of a sports? Is that the geography side of it? Is it a political side of it?
I think it's
I'm
a
very interested in that.
yeah, it's no, it's a great question. It's I mean, when you look at that, it comes down to human geography. It's a concept in human geography and like identity formation. Um, but essentially what you're looking at is, natural human tendencies. You're looking at human tendencies of looking for a place of belonging, being part of community, but also looking for agency. One thing as humans that we strive to do, I believe a lot of us do, is to find our identity and who we are. And a lot of that is finding a community to do that with. Now, sports provide a tremendous agency to do that. Now you've got your sports clubs, your franchises you have out here, and your college teams. We've got our soccer clubs in Europe and other parts of the world that people find attachment to. And these clubs, they create history. They were formed, a lot of the soccer clubs were formed during the period of the Industrial Revolution, going back over 100 years, but also during the height of it, when a process that we call in geography called urbanization, when people leaving from the rural areas, moving to towns and cities, a lot of these people are moving and they, maybe coming from different areas with different dialects or different languages or different kind of religion, different cultures, and these people come to these places like and looking for work, and when they do, there's not much to connect these people and find agency. Whereas these soccer clubs get built up, these teams get built up, and then people start coming to as spectators following the team. And then over generations, if people are still living in those areas, that those ideas and traditions are passed down so to their children, and then their grandchildren, and then so forth. And then there you go, you get your legacies, and people start telling stories. That's kind of like for your club. Now with international, it changes it a little bit more, because in international now it gets a little bit more political. Okay, actually a lot more political, because now you're talking about actual state lines, and our world today, the world today is organized through the nation state system still, to this day. We still have boundaries and borders that separate us, as countries and nations. What it means to be part of that nation, however, has changed significantly over the last sort of 100 to 200 years. Today now, a lot of people identify with their nation through their sports team. If you just go to Brazil, for example, Brazil is one of the most diverse countries in the world, not just ethnically, but also in terms of geography. I mean, you've got coastlines, you've got mountain areas, highland areas, you've got the Amazon, you've got tremendous access to different kind of landscapes. And when you go to those landscapes, it shapes the environment those people live in. Now, these are very different people depending where you go. But when the national team come into town and play in the World Cup, no one cares about that anymore. All they care about is that yellow jersey and how they do in the World Cup and how they play, how they perform, and who they play and how they beat them. Again, you get a Brazil versus, say, Argentina in a World Cup game. Oof, you better believe like nothing else matters for that 90 minutes. Like literally nothing matters. And you see that now happening with other nations and other states. And so when the World Cup does come around, it's a big deal for everyone, And then you just look at the last World Cup. I think it was in 2022. It took place in Qatar. Argentina won, and it took place in the wintertime in the Northern Hemisphere, but it was obviously the summertime in the Southern Hemisphere. So when Argentina won, and then you see like they celebrate in Buenos Aires, I mean, there's millions of
Yeah.
people in the main streets. I mean, some people are hanging off the lampposts,
Mhm.
like traffic lights. and like off the bridges just to get a view of the team. And the team is like on this bus, open top bus, parading the World Cup. They're all, you know, having a great time. But you look at how many people just come into town to see that. It's tremendous, and that effect is because of the agency it brings and what it means to people, the meaning. And it goes back to when we said you talked about the Miracle on Ice from 1980. I've replayed that the final parts. I've forgotten his name. Is it Al Michaels? I think he's commentating, right? And he says, "Do you believe in miracles?" As the final buzzer goes, and he says it. He goes, "Yes, you do." And you just see you know, the people that just run out onto the ice and just like it's just bedlam. It's just pure bedlam, and it's just like it's that ecstasy that people get when you win or score a goal. But then all of a sudden, you look at the team that lost and look at the agony they're going through,
Didn't they
and
do a
then you just
documentary
see.
about that team? I think they did a documentary about that team from the Soviet perspective.
Yeah.
They went back to the Soviet Union. They were almost like
What
emotionally like go in hiding because they
well, they won 5 back-to-back gold medals coming into that,
yeah.
and
Mhm.
and then they're playing a bunch of kids, really college kids that maybe 3 or 4 of them had some experience playing at pro league at that time. So I mean, it was a big deal. But then it also shows the effect of the home crowd. I mean, it was in Lake Placid in New York,
Yeah.
so you know, having like you know, we you say it's the 12th man in soccer, right? I mean, in their
Mhm.
case, I guess it would have been. Is it 6 that they have on the hockey field? I think it's 6, right? Or
Yeah.
five, five,
Five out
They
and
have
six.
five.
Yeah.
5 out and one in the goal.
One goalie. So that would have been their 7th player, I guess, on the ice.
Well, then you
So
add
you
on
know,
top of that, the 1980s was the heart of the Cold War,
there was that
and it makes
rhetoric as well. Yeah,
that pumps the temperature up. You
absolutely.
think
And
the
that's where the
World Cup?
media. Yeah.
You think the Yes, it's the media. I do think it's the media. I think maybe the
Mhm.
players aren't like that, but do you think the World Cup is our greatest expression of that politics and sports mix because it is the World Cup? I mean, it is the world.
I truly do believe that to most extent. I mean, people say the Olympics. The thing is with the Olympics is there are team sports, but there's a lot of individual sports as well. So obviously there's the medal count, but I don't think the medal count means as much to many people as it does if you are in a World Cup game.
Mhm.
And I think the World Cup has kind of become that way of doing it as a team sport, and provides that sort of more team, sort of us and them sort of narrative that can develop. It's happened many times I've seen in my lifetime. When I was very young, I remember, you know, being an England fan. Being an England fan, you know, we played Argentina in the 1986 World Cup, and that was you know, a big game. But it was a big game because, you know, the media stirred it up because 4 years earlier there was an actual war between England and Argentina, well, the United Kingdom and Argentina over a small lands called the Falkland Islands, which is off the coast of Argentina. And you know, the United Kingdom was behaving like the British Empire again, and but Argentina was also under a military dictatorship at the time.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of politicking going on between both governments, and it escalated to a war. Well, when the World Cup came about, you know, the media were like, "Well, let's pull at these strings a little bit," you know, and there's a documentary on HBO called Diego Maradona. You know, it was arguably one of the greatest soccer players of all time, and he featured in that game. And in that game, he managed to score arguably the greatest goal of all time in a World Cup, where he took the ball from the halfway line and dribbled it and scored. And then before that, 5 minutes before that, he actually scored a goal with his hand, and they called it the hand of God. And there were so many stories that were attached to that, that you think about the time where it's like, well, you know, that was payback for Britain stealing the UK stealing the Falkland Islands from Argentina, or for the war, it was payback for the war. And then you hear all the players in the commentary, and they're like, no, we're just playing a game of football. You know? But the
But
way it
it's
was like
I
built
feel
up,
like
it was
that's
like it was war.
it's like how you relate to it, I guess, is like as a sports fan. It's like I'm not
Yeah,
actually playing the game, so
yeah.
I've got you on this one, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So it plays itself out, and then what happens subsequently is every time they play now, that's referenced, and then the next game's referenced, and then and there was one where I think in the 90s when they played in France in the World Cup, and David Beckham was involved, right? And he got a red card in the game for doing something quite petulant in the game. He kind of lashed out a player that was winding him up during the game, and he got a red card. Well, then the England lost the game on a shootout, and then weeks after he got destroyed by the press, and then it kind of those narratives went to the public. They were doing awful things like hanging effigies of him, of like in the streets, and like putting death threats to him and his family. And you're like,
Yeah.
this isn't sport. What is this?
This is
Like what's
crazy.
going on? It's
Well, in
crazy.
Colombia,
Yeah.
wasn't somebody killed?
Yeah, yeah. After the '94 World Cup, it was
Yeah, an own goal, and they killed him.
it was an own goal. Yeah, it was the captain Andres Escobar. Yeah,
Yes.
he accidentally put the ball in his net, an own goal, and then I don't think it was directly related to that, but I mean he went
Heck of a
back and
narrative.
yeah, the narrative was there again that, oh, you scored, so we're going to shoot you now. But it weren't.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a little bit more complexities to. There's a lot more nuance to that
Yeah.
story. But that was also tied in with a lot of politics that were going on in the country with the notorious crime the
Yeah.
crime boss Pablo Escobar.
Yeah.
So there was that dynamic involved in the country that broke down, and that allowed for him to get shot. So again, we're seeing how sport is crossing over into those political arenas as well as social and cultural arenas too.
Do you like, I know you've talked about how you've like integrated this into your teachings, but do you remember like a specific moment, a moment that you can pinpoint where like, holy shit, this is so interconnected. I like have to make this a part of my teaching.
Yeah, I think it was quite funny. I saw it on I think it was like a social media post. Um, and I think it was the last World Cup, and I watched who was it? It was Argentina lost to Saudi Arabia in the first
First game.
game,
The first
right?
game.
Mhm.
First game.
Yeah.
And it was such a shock. And the Saudi fans were like just loving it, and they were just like they were on like social media, like saying things like "Where's Messi" and stuff like that. But then they were all dancing in the streets, but they were dancing with Brazilian fans because they beat Argentina, and they were dancing to like some British music, and I was just like, this is it right here. This is like, look at what's going
The
on here.
connection.
Like
Yeah.
they're in a country that's developing in the Middle East. You got a neighboring country that just beat a team that's going to probably win the whole thing, and they're dancing with their rivals because they beat them. And I was just like, this is amazing. Like, this is this is true international cultures coming in together and being put on the world stage, and people can see this. So that was probably one of the
That was your
The
moment.
moment.
Yeah, that was the moment too. I have a 9-year-old who liked soccer, but he went from liking soccer to loving soccer after 2022.
Oh
Yeah.
wow.
And what else was cool was we got him the FIFA video game.
Oh,
And then
okay.
he memorized everybody's
All
name.
the players,
He
all their
memorized
stats.
all
Yeah.
their
Love
stats.
it.
Um, Everything in his room was messy. Um, he has long blonde hair like Holland, so he's like wants a Holland jersey, put his hair back, and he wanted, and that started because we started watching the World Cup in 22, and he completely got enthralled. He knew all the dances, he
The
knew all the
celebrations.
music, all the celebrations. He got in trouble by me as a 6-year-old because he scored a goal and sprinted, slid on his knees, and did the yoga stance in the middle of the field like he was Holland. I was so embarrassed. Like, get up, get up, get up, get up. Because like he scored and he just wanted to celebrate like it. And we had the conversation after. I said, buddy, when you make $150 million like Holland and we live in Europe, feel free to slide. But until then, you're going to score a
That's
goal
six.
and high five your friends and go back and play. At 6 years old, that's how we play the sport, right? But no, because he saw it on TV, he wanted to slide and sit and do it, all that. And I'm surprised his shirt was on still. I mean, his shirt came off, called everybody to the corner, whatever. But the subject is so fascinating to me, even when you're talking about the global side of it. It makes me think about even just the regional side of it inside our own state.
Yep. Yep.
and how, and we're coming up to college football and we're hearing people talk. And
Tomorrow.
I've had kids I knew that played at Alabama. They would say, Coach, every time we left Alabama and came to visit our family in South Carolina, we always got pulled over in Georgia.
Hmm.
Right? You know what I'm saying? And I'm like,
Yep.
oh, we're always afraid we're going to get tickets in Georgia because we had Alabama football players in a car and they're going to get
Wow.
pulled over in Georgia and we're going to get a ticket for something because we're
Wow.
Alabama football players driving through Georgia. And
Yeah.
you break it all the way down to even high school sports. And you know, my sister grew up in Michigan as a Michigan fan, but she moved to South Carolina years ago, and now she's the biggest South Carolina Gamecock fan. And you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? And I'm just like,
No,
and I do think it comes back to people just want to belong to something. They want to cheer for something.
that's it.
They want to have
That's it.
something bigger than their everyday lives. So turning on their
Hmm.
sports teams or knowing a team
Yeah.
that represents their hometown.
Yeah.
And then I think about in Europe, where you grew up, it's Man City and Man United. It's not even England. You're in the same city.
Yeah.
So now we break that down into even more regional
Mhm.
areas, right?
Scale. Yeah. Yeah.
Now yes,
Scale.
it scales. And
Yeah.
um the politics side of it blows me away. The community building side of it
Yeah.
Mhm.
blows me away. Um and it was our conversation that made me think about this more and made me so excited about our conversation. People will forget about every difference they have in the world.
Oh yeah.
And if you're wearing the same jersey of the team that I'm wearing, we are best friends on game day.
Exactly. Exactly.
And the fact
You
that you study that
know,
is amazing to me
I
because
wish I would have known about it. Like two
I
of my favorite
know.
things in
And
the world are
what?
I love geography and I'm so good at geography. You remember the game Trivia Crack that you'd have on your phone? Like if you ever
Yeah.
played me in geography, you're losing
Yeah.
in 30 seconds. Like I'm really good at it. And sports. And so I'm just like I think about it all the time now. I'm like that would have been such a cool thing to do. But
Yeah.
even like talking about the whole soccer thing, I went to my first European professional soccer game last year. We did AC Milan versus Inter Milan. And like we put on AC Milan gear because Christian Pulisic plays for AC Milan. So
Oh.
we're like, okay, we're gonna pull for AC Milan. They lost in the final. And it was like, but leaving the stadium was the wildest experience I've ever had in my life. We all like hid our scarves, like walking
Yeah.
out. We had like, I think we talked about this last time.
really,
Yeah.
Little kids yelling at you in Italian, like all I was crazy, but it is. It's just like such camaraderie
It
around the
is. It,
sport.
it, it is amazing. Yeah. It
I
really
think it's
is.
cool that you're taking something that everybody relates to. It's sports. I don't care. 90% of our culture has some memory around sports,
Yeah.
and you're tying it to really big concepts: politics, geography, society.
Mhm.
And to me, that is just a great way to tie in educating people about history.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That is so cool to me. And I'm like, obviously, your job is your job. Obviously, it's got to be a passion too. But when you tell people how you tie sports into education, some people got to be like, that's pretty dang cool. Like, your kids got to be like, man, I thought it was just going to be this kind of class. And all of a sudden, we're tying in sports and education and geography, politics, how it pertains to sports.
Yeah.
Looking at the things you sent over, so many places to go. Is there anything you want to touch on the community building side through sports that you're quote teaching now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when you look at the community building, again, like, just going back to, creating a course, I think, the course resonates with a lot of people. One of the reasons we propose the course is how sports help become so ubiquitous in society and everyday life. Whether or not you're an actual sports fan or an athlete or even just playing like sports recreationally, it's just part of your everyday life, and it allows us to again look at have a look, use it as like a mirror to look at our own selves in society, and people find ways to connect, and learn new skills like soft skills with sports. Learning how to, do you have many people that go to watch sports games that don't actually watch the sports games, but they go just to hang out with people? I mean, like
That's me with
I'll talk to,
baseball.
yeah,
I don't
like
care
the
about
amount of people,
baseball.
but even things like the Super Bowl, like I'll talk to
Yeah.
students and be like, we're in the start of the spring semester, a couple of weeks in when the Super Bowl takes place, and they'll come in and I'll be like, how many of you watched the Super Bowl this weekend? And they'll all put their hand up, or went to a Super Bowl party this weekend. And I said, how many of you actually watched the Super Bowl? And maybe like three hands go. And I'm like, so you guys just went just to hang out with your friends, eat some food, have some drinks, and just like, have a good time. And they're like, exactly. And that's what it is. It's social cohesion that it brings. When you go, it could be a bar or a house party or whatever, something like that, where people come in together and then they're like, they're hanging out with their friends, they're getting that camaraderie, they're getting that agency. You might not even care about any of the teams, but you like that feeling. It feels really good to be part of that. Um, but then when you look at the cohesion, again, in geography, we talk about scale, and you can look at multiple scales. So at the local scale, you can look at, and I'm sure, Gray, you've played this. You probably played AYSO when you were growing up, right? A little bit. Did you play
I don't
AYSO?
I don't think
Okay,
so.
so AYSO is like a big um recreation soccer league in the United States. And it's not in
Okay.
every state, but it's in like a lot of the states. And it's largely organized by parents and volunteers. And people come in together and it's like it's a non-profit organization that they'll basically get kids from like young as 5 all the way up to like 18 or whatever, but they put these small rec teams together, and it's usually volunteer parents, volunteer referees, volunteer
Hmm.
administrators, a lot of people volunteering to make it work
Yeah.
over
We
over
got
that
that like
period.
we had it through our church. Like a lot of churches would put that on in South Carolina, I guess, when I was little. I mean, this would have been, gosh, 25 years ago now at this
Right,
point. So it was
right,
started, I guess, by a couple of the churches in our region. I think that's right. But
right,
they had
right.
like the
So
volunteers and stuff. But yeah.
yeah, so you're getting people like volunteering their time to do that. And then you go to the next level and then you're looking at, okay, well, this is also going at adult level, and then you're starting to see that happen at adult level. But then it changes and changes into the economics part and the social cohesion. So part of the course is I'm going to take the students, we're hoping to take them on a field trip to SoFi Stadium, okay, which is a brand new stadium
Yeah.
in Los Angeles. It's incredible if you have not been there. It's a truly incredible stadium and great bit of engineering that we've seen and architecture. But when they go there, I want them to kind of study and ask questions. They'll go on a tour and ask questions of how that place how that stadium now impacts that place and the people around it. And you look at the jobs that it can provide to some people. You look at like how it changes the landscape and allows other things to be built around it that can help and change the economy. And then you just start seeing the cohesiveness of that community because the stadium is there and it becomes a
Hmm.
focal point of that place. And so over time, that stadium now becomes, oh, it's SoFi, there's this connected to it, there's that connected to it. And a lot of people are connected their lives through that process. And that's just, again, one part of that scale process that we talked about. But again, it's just more examples of how sport can connect people, through multiple facets of or human geographic dimensions of like I said, we said before, culture, politics, society, or sociology. We can look at that through there. But economics is the big one for me. As today, you guys even talk about with your youth sports, it's the economics, it's
Hmm.
the business, it's become the avenue for entrepreneurship. And I know there's a lot of criticisms to it, but also we live in the country of like the most probably entrepreneurs anywhere else. So you kind of inviting that on anyway. But yeah, again, you're seeing that cohesiveness in sports that act as a conduit for that to all take place and materialize.
You bring up the economic side when you said it, a lot of things started to click because, I mean, cities and countries spend billions on sports. When you think about the people that when they do the lottery or the bid for who's going to host the Olympics, the first thing they talk about is the economic boom that it's going to bring to that city or that country.
Yep.
Have, I watched a documentary about how when the Dodgers baseball organization was in Brooklyn, and all of a sudden in the 60s, I think the owners took it to LA because LA started to grow and everything was moving west. And, LA was cool and Hollywood, right? And the broken-hearted people in Brooklyn talking about how like these were the teams I watched when I was a boy, and the owners must be evil, and they uprooted culture in Brooklyn and moved to LA. Nobody cares about LA and New York. And even when the Dodgers play the Mets, it's like still like ugh, and they're mad about when they moved them out, and you hear that kind of stuff in the economic side. And yeah, it does, like you said, it kind of gets a bad rap in the youth level. Um, because they feel like they've kind of taken away I don't know, what do you call the innocence of youth sports a little bit? Is that what you would say? How would you describe it?
Again, I think there's multiple ways you can look at what's gone on in youth sports, and there's multiple ways you can take that conversation, and it's good to have the conversation. I think
Agree.
what you guys are doing with it, I mean, I've listened to again a lot of your podcasts about the youth sports, the state of youth sports right now. It's excellent you're having the conversations. I think, like I said, there's always there's pros and cons to a lot of things, and I think that when we talk about like how youth sports have become so oversaturated with professionalism. In other words, you've got a lot of people being paid to coach youth soccer teams or youth sports teams, in multiple capacities at different levels. Maybe there is, some oversaturation, but on the flip side, it's created jobs, it's created an economy, and it allows people to do that.
Mhm.
Sorry, I've got dogs in the back and they're getting a little
It's okay.
restless. But it creates, it contributes to the economy, and so much so more than I've seen in other parts of the world. And it creates this infrastructure. Again, we talk about the women's soccer, the women's soccer infrastructure in the United States. The reason why the women's soccer team are so good and are so far ahead, or have been so far ahead of many other states, is because obviously you had Title IX, which is a huge part of the legislation, but we created this infrastructure for young girls to play, get coached, and by the time they became adults, they were just better than everyone else.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen without that infrastructure that we talked about, having professional coaching and people dedicating their time to learn. And there are really good coaches out there. But the pressures of economics sometimes, skew what's really going on. I've listened to in a couple of your podcasts that you guys had people on, and I hear that you're talking about how, there's pressure from the institution or the club or the owner of like, okay, well, we need that check next year.
Yeah.
So how are we going to get that check next year sometimes becomes a more larger conversation than how do we make these players, what's the right thing for these players or whatever it becomes. So again, there's a lot of blurry lines here. There's a
Yeah.
lot of, a lot of blurred lines. And I think it's like very important that the conversations continue. I do think there is room for it to improve. I do think there's always room to improve. Um, but I also do think that we also need to find ways to get kids to start organically solving problems by themselves. I think what I noticed a lot more, when I was growing up playing sports and being involved, is that we kind of organize ourselves a little bit more. Kind of when there was disputes, we'd figure them ourselves out a little bit more. But I noticed today that a lot more disputes, like parents want to be really involved to make sure that the kids don't get like, I don't know, in their minds they might feel like they're getting cheated. They don't want their kids to be cheated or being shorted somehow because oh, if I was there, that wouldn't happen, that kind of thing. And then if that parent's involved and that parent's involved, then it just escalates and escalates. And next thing you know, the kids are just standing on the side and they're just going, you know,
Yeah.
they don't have any ownership on what's going on. So I think there needs to be ways to continue conversations and ways to keep getting people to find ways, find solutions. But a fundamental issue becomes the economics, because you're talking about livelihoods for a lot of people. So people need to still pay rent or pay their mortgage, or put groceries in their fridge. It's difficult when economics gets involved, very difficult, especially in times when the cost of living today has just become very difficult as well for a lot of people. So there's that aspect too. So again, do you see how it like goes and
Yeah.
overlaps into so many different ways?
Yeah. We talked about the NIL thing, and
Yeah,
you'll hear a lot of people overwhelmingly say NIL's bad, it's corrupted it becomes all about money. And we had a girl on that she's a sports agent now, but she was on the national team in Germany for basketball.
yeah.
And she goes, yeah, it's caused, people to jump around from team to team to team. That's kind of like, my son now doesn't have favorite teams, he has favorite players.
Mm,
He doesn't have favorite teams. He likes the player, not the team, and that's new to me in sports. And she said, "Yeah, that's true." But she goes, "But the NIL has also created financial opportunities for some people that would never have had it." And she goes, "Think about, the 19-year-old basketball player who grew up with low-income single mom. She became really good at basketball, and a great basketball team offered her a $500,000 to come there to play college basketball, and she's living in low income housing with three of her relatives, and now that opportunity has changed her family's future. I don't know anybody that would say, "Oh, that's a bad thing." That's just things we have to consider. Do we
mm.
have to consider, some of the other things too? Yeah. But I know multiple stories of people who have changed their futures because of that. And that puts you that doesn't sit in a silo. You can't say, "Oh, that's bad," because I have multiple stories where people's lives were changed.
Right, right, right.
I got a heart for that, right?
Mhm.
I also have a heart for kids I know that played on baseball teams that won national championships, made universities millions of dollars, and they graduated with school debt. How did this kid graduate with school debt? He just gave 4 years of his life to a university that made millions of dollars off their wins, right? It's
Yeah.
amateurism, like you said, right?
No, this is the amateurism that we talked about
Yeah.
earlier, right? This is it into full effect right here. And again, like I remember about maybe 10 years ago, I was playing a video game, right? It was the NCAA football game, right? And I don't know, obviously, we were talking about how your kid was playing FIFA and they learned all the players' names and stuff like that. Well, 10 years ago, I don't know what it's like now, I haven't played it since, but on this NCAA football game, you had these players and they just had their numbers and they looked like the players, but they didn't have their names on it.
Yep.
And then I'm like, oh, okay. And then I'm looking back and it's like, again, it's using the name rights, those kind of things. And again, it comes down to economics. These universities, you could say, all right, they're providing the students with an education, and a fundamental aspect of today is you need a collegiate degree to progress, and to give yourself a good start when you're trying to find employment, which is true. But you look at a certain football player in the team might make the university way more in weighing up the differences between the degree and what they get, that kind of thing. You could argue, is there fairness there?
Mhm.
But then you've got to look at what this means, what the NIL means. And it's great that these players are going to get direct access now to getting sponsorships, and you should have a right to earn money, and no one should try and stop you from doing that.
Especially off your
That's
likeness, right? And
Yeah, absolutely. If it's you that's making the sale, absolutely, you should be able to profit from that. But the long-term effects that we haven't really studied on this is that you've got to understand is, like, you go to most universities and what program is bringing in most of the revenue? It's probably football, right? Probably football, right? More than
Mhm.
likely football. There'll be some other, I'm not, and again, not discrediting any of the other sports, but you look at the revenue, like, say, what's it, the SEC, right? That league, right? So, like, the amount of money that goes into that league because of football, and then what happens? The university use that money to finance the rest of the athletic department,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So the rest of the sports are basically being subsidized to a greater extent because of this money that they're getting. Now, if this money starts getting chipped at and a little bit less comes to the school and more goes to the players, which again, I have no problem with. But the long-term effect there is that, okay, that means a little bit less goes to the rowing team, or a little bit less goes to the track and field team, or a little bit less goes to, the cycling team, or whatever team there is, and the bottom line is eventually a little bit less goes out of that pot. And how does that impact those other sports?
They get rid of them.
Do they cut them because they can't pay the coaches anymore? Do they no longer have the access to the facilities? So we don't know what the long-term effects are going to be. But again, these are some conversations and things that are going to come up. But again, it's the economics. That's what drives all of this. It's the economics. The economy is what fundamentally it drives the way we live every day and how we participate in that. And there's the political aspects of it. There's also the cultural and social aspects of it. But it's ultimately, everyone's got to get paid at some point.
Have you ever heard of something they call the Flutie phenomenon? When Doug Flutie was at Boston College, they beat Miami in a football game. And it was little old Boston College. It was the miracle touchdown he threw. He beat powerhouse Miami. And the following year, Boston College's application rate jumped 17% or something like that.
Wow.
It's a study they did around the Flutie phenomenon. Doug Flutie threw the touchdown. The school started getting more applications, which means more money. So you hear people, and I think a friend of mine, when Clemson won the national championship, talked
I was about
about
to say that.
how Clemson's application rate went through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that also applies to like pro sports, like in where you grew up, right? You said you grew up in London.
Yeah.
If the local soccer team is winning games and titles, do you think more people want to move to that town who are fans, or there's a draw of we have a winning sports program here, right? It works in college sports. More people apply to the school makes more money. But do you think there's a connection between the success, like when the Chicago Bulls were great in the 90s, did more people want to live in Chicago? Was it an
Yeah.
economic boom because the local sports team was great? Everybody wanted to be a part of it. Is there a correlation too? Have you ever looked into that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'll talk from my own experience here. Growing up in London, there's like several clubs, like soccer clubs in London, right? There's Arsenal, which is the team I support. There's Tottenham Hotspurs, which is our direct rival across in North London. Then you've got teams in West London like Chelsea and Fulham. You've got teams in South London like Crystal Palace. And then you've got basically these teams that are all over London. But when you go to school and you start interacting with people in soccer spaces, you might find a couple like Arsenal fans and Tottenham fans, because of, the success they had during the time they grew up when we were growing up. But then you'll start seeing, kids with Manchester jerseys on and Liverpool jerseys on. And then you're like, okay, like, why do you support Manchester? You're not from Manchester, and it's became because they were successful, especially during the 1990s and then the Liverpool team during the 80s. So then you start looking at generations, right? And I see this in the United States. So a lot of people my age or older are Manchester United fans, okay? Because Manchester United was the strong team during the 90s, right? People a little bit older than that were Liverpool fans because they were very good in the 80s, and they're kind of good again now. But then you look for like the group that are a little bit younger than me, probably maybe 10 years younger than me. They're all Chelsea fans because Chelsea were very strong during the 2000s. Then in the 2010s, there's all the Manchester City fans, which is
Yeah.
probably your group, Gray, right? There's
No,
all the
I'm Manchester
City.
United. I'm not a City
Okay,
fan.
oh, you
I'm
stay
a
with
United
Manchester
fan.
United. Okay, all right. Okay, my bad. All right, commiserations for the loss last week.
I know.
My
I haven't
kid,
watched any soccer this year. I've been bad.
my kid is way
But
better at me at FIFA than I am. Way better. He plays all the time. You know, it's funny. He would play with Man City, but he would make me play with Man United so he could beat me like 8-0. And he's 9 years old, man. You know what I'm saying? And like, Dad, you gotta beat Man United because I'm gonna beat you like 9-0. Like, you know what I'm saying? So what you're talking about resonates
yeah,
incredibly with me,
yeah,
right?
And I would even say we have that with professional football here too, though, because not every region has a pro team. Like being in the South, we have the Panthers, we have the Falcons, but like being in South Carolina, we don't have a team. So a lot of people will just choose a team that wins,
right,
and they'll
right.
become a diehard whatever fan because that's the team that wins. You know, we
And,
grew up a lot with that.
and that's so, I mean,
Because
that,
typically you get attached by place. People get attached to place, right?
Yeah,
That's where your team attachment comes to. Like for me, I became a Denver Broncos fan because
right.
Denver was one of the first places I came to in the United States.
yeah.
Yeah,
So like because of that, I, naturally have this affiliation now to Denver. And even though
yeah,
like I don't really go there anymore, I still stick with it. We stay loyal to it and go from there. But yeah, as you just said there, a lot of people do attach to place, but lately it's become attaching to success. And
yeah.
especially if you're new to a sport, you like go, oh, that's good to follow because they win all the time. And
Right.
how many new Kansas City fans are now since
Oh,
they've won so many Super Bowls?
A
But you
lot of
go back
girls too with Taylor Swift. They're now
right,
Kansas
and
City
there's
yeah.
that.
fans.
But you go back 10 years ago and people are like, Kansas who? Like,
Yeah. Or I think too, it's like people get attached to a person a lot of the time. Like I remember vividly, my brother was the biggest Colts fan because he loved Peyton Manning. That was
Peyton
like his
Manning.
number one. Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's just funny to see like the draw that different teams get because of
yeah.
whatever particular reason.
Yeah,
You know,
no,
it makes me
absolutely.
realize too, around times when and during like immigration booms, like my father immigrated here as a 16-year-old, and we were always Cubs fans growing up. Well, what I didn't realize was we were Cubs fans because my grandfather, my dad's dad, learned English watching WGN Cubs games.
Oh,
So
wow.
he knew what baseball was. He knew the rules of baseball. So he would watch Cubs games and start to learn English from watching
Interesting.
Cubs games because he knew what a ground ball was. He'd hear the words, he knew what an out was, he knew the players' names, and he learned English by watching Cubs games. Well, my dad just all of a sudden became a Cubs fan. They grew up in the Chicago area. And now the story is from a family generational side is, our family learned how to speak the language because Chicago Cubs games were on WGN. And I'll be honest with you, Eddie, I never thought about the cultural impact of that until we had our conversation. And now I want to be like, well, how many other stories are there like that that only happened because sports made it happen? So
A
now you're
unifying
using,
force.
yeah,
Hmm.
and now you're using sports to talk about world history, culture, society, geography, politics, and being able to tie that all together, man. And then, that last conversation we had, we talked about the history of professional sports and like how baseball in the South was because the textile mills had teams. They'd work from 9 to 5. Textile teams would have put 11 people out there. They'd play your textile mill. We'd play in a baseball game as a form of activity. And now it's our textile mill against your textile mill, right? And then you think about how many sports started with things like that and the impact. I kind of feel like I've kind of missed the mark on sports, like for my life. Like ever since our conversation, I'm like, man, I've taken all this for granted as just part of what we do. I've never taken a chance to sit back
Yeah.
and look at the cultural impact of sports. And when I first saw your study thinking about sports access, I was like, that's what we want to talk about. Sports access, financial side, maybe some lower income kids can't play sports. Let's have that conversation. But it's so much bigger than that. Holy
Hmm.
cow,
Absolutely.
it's bigger than that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the assignments I'm going to give my students in this course is a research paper where they're going to go to a local high school or college sports game and I want them to kind of like study and basically like an ethnography, where they sort of study the landscape and the cultural landscape and look at the human interactions that's going on in that, like, like say like a high school football game, like what's going on there. Look at the cohesion, the social cohesion that's going on. When like you get there, and obviously you got the gate to get through into the stadium where people sit, the home end, the away end, the away side, that kind of thing, and how people are situated on the outside of the field. And then you've got people that are working around the field to make the game happen. And then you've got the concession areas. Then you've got people like the media that are filming the game, or, reporters that are on the sidelines, those kind of things. But then you're looking at like how many like of the kids that are playing on the field, how many of their friends are around the field and talking to each other and like having a good time with it, or, like producing chants onto the field of what's going on and interacting that way. So I'm going to get them to do that kind of, that kind of a study. That's one of their assignments. But again, it just shows, and just to highlight to them again how the sport is the conduit, if you will, the connector, the way that this is happening, the lens that this is all happening, these human environment interactions. So essentially, that's what it is. It's a geography course, but we're using sports to teach these lessons, these geographic lessons that encompass so many of these human geographic dimensions. Like I said, we said before, economics, politics, sociology or society, and cultural aspects too. So it's just bringing it all in together.
It makes me realize how many times we've met somebody and like, well, I had the concept earlier about the kid from Ohio State, and it's still to this day. I'll meet somebody and I'll be like, yeah, where did you grow up? They'll be like, Ohio. I go, You know what I'm saying? Like, there's like that part of me. I'm like, oh, That's like, that sounds horrible, right? Or, you know what I'm saying? I mean, you hear things
But
like
do you
that.
say you're from Ohio, or do you say you're from a certain part of Ohio?
So I grew up in Michigan.
Depends.
Oh, you
It
grew up
just
in Michigan.
depends.
Yes, and I
Okay,
have
all
friends
right.
that were from Ohio. So like
Okay.
Ohio State football and me in Michigan, they say, "Oh, I'm from Ohio." I assume they're an Ohio State fan. I'm just like, ugh, ugh, like, ugh. And I'm not even that big of a deal about it. But like,
It's a
man,
large rivalry.
Yeah.
there are probably deep-rooted cultural angst
Yeah.
in other sports that have been longer, that are like 5 or 6 generations deep,
Hmm.
that still have personal hurt from the great grandfather of a
Oh,
game
yeah.
they saw in
Yeah.
England. They got cheated by a ref, and
Yeah.
you can't even. I mean, you know what I'm saying? That's
Oh,
a
absolutely. Yeah, I've got family members that I don't talk to for like for weeks, months, maybe years sometimes after an Arsenal Tottenham game. It's like that things will happen, like, and then and those stories they carry on and those kind of things. But I was going to ask you guys, so you guys live in South Carolina. Like,
Hmm.
is there what's the dividing fault lines in South Carolina
South
for
Carolina
So,
Clemson.
yeah,
South.
South Carolina. So my whole family went to Clemson. I was the first Gamecock,
Mhm.
and I was shunned when I chose to go to Carolina. And every so we play the game, the rivalry game, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and I removed myself from the family group chat for that week just
Wow.
because I don't need to hear it. But we won last year, which was really, really fun.
I have
But it's a big rivalry.
I trained athletes for a long time, just specific athletes. And one of my favorite athletes of all time, I had him from 11 years old to 18. He was like the number 3 fullback in the country.
Yeah.
Michigan offered him. I coached a kid in high school and college who ended up pitching in the Cubs World Series. So I was like emotionally tied to it because it was the Cubs, but it's a kid I knew since he was 17 years old. Like, it's like emotional for me. All my dude, he would pitch in the game. My cousins were texting me
Oh,
like, "Your
wow.
boy better not screw this game up." Holy crap. And this kid, I trained him. He had multiple offers anywhere he
Wow.
wanted to go, anywhere he wanted to go. And on commitment day, he chose Ohio State.
Wow.
And I broke my life. I was like,
Oh, man.
so I mean, I'm happy for the kid, obviously. But in part of me, I was like, wow, like, what a stab to the gut from a kid that I've known for 8 years. And he chose the worst school to ever go to in the history of schools.
Yeah.
If you, Eddie, if you've never been around Columbus during like Michigan game time, it's a really fun atmosphere actually because at Ohio State's campus, they cross out every single M on every single sign with a red X. Not kidding. It's insane to see. It's just like I mean, I love college football. Like it's my favorite
Yes.
season, but it gets dirty.
Yeah.
It gets really
No.
Eddie,
dirty.
20 years ago, I went to a conference in Columbus, Ohio. I bought a hotel room outside of the Columbus area because I would not spend money inside Columbus, Ohio. I drove 20 minutes into Columbus
Oh,
because I would not
wow.
spend money inside Columbus and give a dime of my money. And I'm not even that awful. I bet because of soccer in certain areas, there are people I don't there I imagine being a Man City fan and having a Man United guy hanging a Man United flag outside your front door that just moved in. They're like, this guy's got to go.
Yeah.
I can't live
Well,
here.
we have this sort of undertone of like geographic rivalry in England, right? Between the Northerners and the Southerners, right?
Right.
There's a it's a long standing. I mean, in England, you only got to drive like 20, 30 minutes and you're in a totally different like dialect, accent,
Wow.
like way
Okay.
people talk,
Okay.
even
Yeah.
culture to an extent,
Yeah.
such as the rich as the history there and the generations. But and it kind of plays itself out obviously through the soccer, but there is this northern and southern rivalry that kind of encompasses everything. So when it comes down to like even teams that you don't like, say you get a Manchester team and a team from say Leeds or Newcastle or something like that, and they're playing a southern team. If push came to shove, they're more likely to support that team from north than they
Yeah.
are from south.
I
So
Yeah.
kind
you'll
of
see
like that.
that plays itself out too. But it's
Yeah.
interesting when like the national team comes together because obviously everyone's got to coming together now. You got to forget
Mhm.
those boundaries. And
Yeah.
and in Spain, I see it in Spain with the Castilians and the Catalans.
Mhm.
You've
Mhm.
got Barcelona and Madrid. Like they despise each other, and this is
Oh,
political. It's ethnic. It's political. I mean, it's got a lot of history, a lot of bad blood that plays itself politically too.
mm,
But when they play against each other, it's rivalry. But when the team comes together, the national team comes together, they forget about it. So
Yeah.
we talk in geography, there's these concepts of unifying forces. We have centripetal and centrifugal forces. Centripetal forces are going to be forces that sort of unite and bring people together, where centrifugal forces
mm.
separate, break states up. And so why so like sports can become so paradoxical because it can be both at the same time. That you're seeing groups coming together but also tearing each other apart the next day. So it's quite interesting and another a lens to sort of study human environment interactions through sports.
That would be an amazing psychological research paper,
Yeah,
Mhm.
for
right?
sure.
To learn to understand how you could play for Barcelona, someone could play for Madrid. They could both be from Spain. They despise each other. But then when they come together for Spain national team in the World Cup, you better beat England.
Better win. They win.
Better beat
They
Portugal, right? You
yeah.
better beat Portugal,
Yeah.
right?
Well, there's times when there's parts of the country they start booing their own national anthem. So I think it was in the 1990 World Cup. It was Argentina versus Italy, right? And the World Cup was in Italy. And for some strange reason, the Italian host, they decided to play the game in Naples, which was crazy at the time because Napoli, this club Napoli, they
Yep.
had Maradona playing for them at the time. And Maradona is Argentine, right? He's from Argentina. And the southern Italians and the northern Italians, they don't get along, right? They really don't get along. And so you've got this sort of situation where the Southern Italians kind of don't really want to be part of that group. And then you put the national team in that stadium playing against their local hero, Maradona. Well, now you had some Italians actually cheering on Argentina. And then you're just like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So it's interesting how that sometimes, again, the regionalism plays itself out through that. Yeah.
Yeah, the politics behind it really intrigued me
Yeah.
the most of all the conversations because I just started thinking about all these, and my kid watches the sports documentaries all the time on ESPN or Netflix. He watches them
Yeah.
like Like he knows everything about Bo Jackson just from watching the
30 for 30, right? Is it the
30 for
30 for 30?
30,
They're so
watches
good.
all
They're really
that.
good. Yeah.
And they always throw a political or some kind of social issue in there and what was going on. Um, but man, what I would really like to do, Eddie, is this the first time you're teaching this class, or is this
First time. This is it. We've got we're pioneering this next week. So we're
I
really
would
excited.
I would love to do a part two where maybe towards the end of this semester, you come back and give us the notes and the concepts and the things you've learned teaching this class. What kind of feedback you got, what the kids talked about, what their experiences were like as a way to just do a follow-up to this one. So you can be like, hey, this was the first time we've done it, but this is what we learned from these people's experiences because there's nothing more of a melting pot than a college classroom.
Mhm.
And I bet you're going to have some very interesting conversations with some people that probably have some personal opinions on some things, right? Because you could really touch deep-rooted things from a religious standpoint if you wanted to. And I think you have to have those conversations, right? Because so much understanding comes from that conversation,
Yeah.
right? Uh, religion and sports and those kind of things. Are they touchy? Yeah, but does it mean we don't talk about them? No, we have to. And if you can create that kind of environment, because region and religion are going to go together, right? They all have sports, they're all going to connect, there's going to be some strife there.
Mhm.
That would really interest me as well. So I would love to do a part two and just have you take some mental notes and be like, that I didn't expect that from this class.
Right.
Or I didn't know we were going to touch on that in these conversations.
Right.
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 I would really like that.
No, for
Yeah, I think
sure.
that'd be awesome.
Yeah, that would be my pleasure. I would love to do that. So yeah, would look forward to that.
I appreciate you coming on, man. If you have anything to send us during your class, can you just send it? If you're like, hey, here's something that somebody brought, can you just shoot it over to us?
Absolutely, absolutely. I will make sure to stay in touch. I'll give you
Yeah.
guys some updates, and yeah, we'll touch base again for sure. And I'll just kind of give you guys like periodic updates, and then
Yeah.
yeah, hopefully by
You
the end
sent
of
me
the
your
semester.
syllabus, bro, because I'm going to go in there and I might like make you zoom me into a class one day or
I was
something.
going to say you guys might as well just fly over and attend one of the classes.
I told Josh
We
I
get you
wanted to
guys
start
being a
taking some.
guest.
I told
Yeah.
him I wanted to start taking some business trips. We need to do some
Yeah,
studies.
Is this a
absolutely.
is this a is this subject something that's happening in other college? Like, do you know other people? Have you connected with other people teaching this in college universities? Is this the first of what you know, or what's the trend here?
So sports geography or geography in sports, there are actually differences there, but it's a newer sort of branch into geography. It's happened. We've had a couple of classes. I've seen through a couple of schools. I've had some classes. It's very much in the pioneering phase because you've got a lot more of what I'd say the front end, the more upper division stuff going, the more critical geographies going on, which is a bit more advanced my class is 100 level. So we're bringing in freshmen here, and the idea is to get them excited about geography,
Okay.
um, to get, try and encourage them to take geography as a major. And here's what you can do with it, and obviously look at sports as the lens to study that. So it is new for us there, but a lot of the work that's been done has been done more at the sort of the more advanced level, the upper division levels. And it's something obviously, I would like to aspire to take this to at some point, but we're just getting started right now, and it's exciting times. I'm excited because again, we're going to get to work with freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, so they'll come in. But yeah, just see where it goes, and really looking forward to it.
All right, man. I appreciate your time, man. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much.
you, guys. All the best. Have a great rest of the day. Cheers.